Morning. This is Biniam on the Checkin In podcast. Welcome to this sunny Tuesday today. I have to remind myself because when we have a long weekend here, which we just did, it was a Thanksgiving long weekend. I tend to be thrown off. I tend to try and intentionally remind myself which day are we on now because today's not Monday, today's Tuesday. So I'm glad to have you guys joining in. I think on the YouTube it's somewhat struggling to stay on stream there, but we'll see how things transpire as we keep going along here. Glad to have you guys. Shar, I see you in there. I see you, my friend Ollie. Good morning. Today is episode number 72. Look at this progressing towards the 100 episode mark. We are doing fantastic. So thrilled to have you guys being a part of this in my morning. This is, like I said, the Bin Checkin podcast where, as a life recalibrator, I do some self-care for myself first and foremost. I work on me by asking self-reflective questions. And I share that process with you guys. I invite you guys into that process as well. Work on while answering these questions, and that is number one. I like talking about awareness about me and how I'm made up, how I'm navigating through the world. Number two, I really appreciate the element of expressing kindness to myself, because as we are processing change, it's really necessary that we give ourselves that space to be able to grow into the people we want to become. We're all processing growth that way, and definitely worthwhile having kindness and patience extended that way. And the third, I love focusing on the happiness components, which is really important for me. How do we experience more happiness by processing all the other emotions along the way? Welcome to the 72nd episode of the Bin Checkin In podcast. How do you spend your spare time? How do you spend your spare time? That's the question we're answering. I'm glad to have you guys joining in on it. I'd love to hear your thoughts as well as we carry on in today's podcast. A few preliminary remarks on the question that I am observing, as I customarily do. This question is one of those that has to do with our presence here and now. Like, what are we doing right now? How are we sort of navigating? What kind of things are on our radar? And how are we going through life on that? So, in reference to the present and how this question addresses that, like, how do you spend your spare time in the present moments? I found myself feeling some guilt, some embarrassment, some concern, and I'll tell you why. For me, I found myself feeling those because sometimes I'm a little harder on myself when I look at the time that I spend and say, was that the best investment of my time? Was this the best way that I could have given myself to what I wanted to or valued in my life? And I have to remind myself, hey, how are you, my man? Nice to see you. I have to remind myself in the midst of going through life and trying to become a better version that it's really important that I extend that patience. Hello, Brandon. That I extend that patience in sense of saying, hey, it's all right that I may not have things all figured out or put together. And so, when I think of the spare time that I have and how I spend it, I tend to be precious time, and there's better things that you could be doing with your time. Like my mind story goes like this, and so this is an area that I'm actively working on extending kindness and patience to myself. This is an area that I struggle with because I have an idea of what it should be, and I sort of bind myself to that expectation of what should be. And I'm just in a season where I'm saying, okay, what does it look like for me to slow down on that and hmm, slow down on it and be patient with myself on this one here. So, yeah, welcome to my process. And as I do this, I hope I can also encourage and model for you guys what that looks like when we are able to sort of slow down and say, okay, what does that? This question also seems to presume. Oh, by the way, for those on the YouTube, I'm hoping it's coming through. It says your connection is unstable, where they're trying to reconnect it. So I'm just going to keep on going. If it's a bad connection on the YouTube for the recording, I'll of course take the Instagram recording and plug that into the YouTube. So just a heads up on the YouTube side there. Yes. So what I was about to say is, as I look at this question as well, something else that occurs to me is that this question has more to do with um, the assumption that we do get spare time. And I think most of us do get spare time. In the midst, even for the busiest of us, in the midst of a busy schedule, I think we still find those moments in between, moments of relief, moments of where we can grab a quick breath and, sort of recalibrate, moments where we can say, oh, I'm not sure if you've ever thought of the fantastic nature of what it's like when we have spare time to invest. It's that kind of thing where it's almost like a breather in life, right? You know what it's like when you're really, really thirsty and then you get someone offering you a cold cup of water and you're like, oh, I really need this right now. I wonder if we can't start seeing um, this experience of having spare time in our life as those refreshing moments that we get to do whatever we wish in that moment, that spare time to invest as we would like, right? And that's the second component. I think it is usually invested in things that bring us happiness or satisfaction or, in some sense, relief, right? That's what it seems to me that spare time does, at least in my experience. I'm not sure if that's how it is for you guys. And of course, I post the recording on Spotify as well. So those are the primary platforms where you can find the work that I do. I'm glad you asked the question. So, as I think about this question again, how do you spend your spare time? One, it is a place where I'm having to exercise actively to be kind to myself and saying, hey, I'm not going to be hard on myself. I'm not going to like beat myself down if I'm not using my spare time the way I want. Yeah, because that's what I usually used to do. And I'm not in that season anymore. I want to grow out of that way of thinking. Secondly, I want to definitely, acknowledge the spare time I do get. I think most of us do get spare time, like I was saying. We get spare time, those in between moments where we get a. And when we do get those times, it is wonderful to be able to say, okay, I'm going to like just do something on the sidelines here for this space of time, this space of spare time that I have. And so it's something that I think is fantastic to reflect on. And what is name in Spotify? Oh, goodness. Oh, Brandon, have I not sent that to you? I did promise I was going to send that to you. I can't believe I forgot if I did. I thought I did. Okay, I will let's see here on Spotify. What is it called? Let me just pull it up here and make sure that what I am saying is true. If you go on Spotify and we do a search, let's do a search for checking in. There it is. Okay, so it is the Bin Checking In podcast. Bin Checking In. So let me just type that in the stream there for you, Brennan. So type Bin Checking In podcast. Send that there. Okay, there you go, Brandon. I just typed what you can find it at in Spotify, and hopefully that helps you find it there. So, as we're looking at the question, hello, Leanne. Nice to see you, my dear. As we're looking at that consideration of spare time, um, that element of gratitude also comes up for me. If most of us do get that spare time in our schedules, that time to be able to reflect, that time to be able to take a break from whatever it is we're doing, I wonder what an expression of gratitude would look like in the midst of that time. So, again, the question we're answering today is how do you spend your spare time? And I was just saying, for me, it's one of those areas that I need to extend graciousness, patience, kindness to myself because I am usually really hard on myself when I assess the way I've spent my spare time. I'm thinking, man, that was a really poor use of your time during that spare time. You wasted it. You could have done something more productive. I was brought up in this context where I should always be productive and getting stuff done. And if I wasn't, that's a waste of time. And so I never really grew up learning how to be able to be patient with myself and actually to take breaks. And so, in some sense, it's inculcated in me. It's sort of put into my disposition this hard work ethic, but on the side of hard work that isn't often healthy or balanced. So I'm more of a workaholic than I am of one who has a balance of good hard exertion when you're doing hard work and then really enjoying the spare time to relax and take it easy. And that's something I'm working on personally in my out. I don't have to have it all together. I don't have to have it all together because here's me just fumbling my way forward, trying the best that I can to make this worthwhile so that it works well. You're welcome, Brandon. My pleasure. And then the final thing that I am also noticing is that we do spend that spare time. We do spend ourselves in doing something. There are things I think that all of us have by way of expression when we do get spare time. So I rarely, if ever, have heard of someone who has spare time that they don't spend some in some way doing. We always find something to fill our time, right? Whatever it is we're doing, even if we're just sitting being bored, we're doing something. It's not possible to not do anything in the midst of the time that we have, but in that spare time component, those moments when we do get that time to reflect or deviate or do whatever we would like, I it seems to me, it seems to me in that spare time that yeah, it's an expression where something is happening. It's actively happening, whether even if we're just sitting down and watching a movie or doing nothing, that is actively doing something in our spare time. And so, um, a spare time is spent just like all other time, and hence the benefit of asking this question of how do we spend our spare time? How can we be intentional about the time that we're spending? Um, when we do get that spare time. So those are some reflections that I was having in reference to today's question. In my mind, I've got some big ideas of how I spend my spare time that have little offshoots. So the big ways, one, I love to give my time, and then I also like to think through my time. So a huge part of my time, my spare time, is given to thinking or giving. Okay, so there's those two main things and ways that I spend my spare time. Um, Before I talk a little bit about those, let me talk about some of the ways that I used to spend my spare time. In a future episode, we're going to talk about the question of how would you like to spend your spare time, and that's reflecting more about your present time in the future, how you'd like to think about actualizing that spare time. I'm not answering that question today. More so, I'm just reflecting on how I used to. Once upon a time, spend my spare time in ways that I felt super guilty about, and it like racked my mind, and I was just always living in this zone of guilt because I could never spend my spare time in a way like I really don't care what people think for the most part. I'm going to do what I'd like to do, and work towards having a disposition where it doesn't matter what people say or do or think in reference to my choices. That's where I'm at. But once upon a time, the way I used to spend my spare time was as follows. I used to spend my spare time in ways that brought me joy and happiness, but I felt guilty for the way that I extended that. So, one of the things I used to enjoy doing was watching movies or watching TV shows. Loved it. But I felt so guilty because this is a waste of time. That's how I was brought up to believe it. I was brought up to say that TV and watching movies a waste of time. So whenever I would do those things, I would to invest myself here. And so I love it. I would enjoy it, but I feel like I was doing something that was bad or taboo. I'd be like, ooh, this is not good, and that's how I'd walk away from that experience, unfortunately. But that was me and how I was brought up. And so, even to this day, I have to remind myself when I sit down to watch a movie, it's like, hey, this is okay. This is an appropriate extension of yourself in the way that you're finding to spend your spare time. That's totally fine. Um, I love movies just because they're like stories, right? These are like our modern day stories in which we get to see a presentation of a plot, and as we're watching that plot, we get to use our imagination and we put ourselves off tonight to find at least TikTok where you're at, on Instagram and on YouTube. And of course, the recording goes onto the Spotify as well. What was I saying? Oh yeah, I was saying even to this day, I find myself having to reaffirm and say it's okay for me to enjoy this process because as I'm doing so, this is something that still serves my soul. There's nothing wrong with being able to sit back and enjoy those moments in life when you get them because we know how life is a struggle. Life is already a struggle enough on its own. And so we don't need extra voices in our space coming and telling us how worthless we are because we wasted time, how um, how we are being irresponsible because we could be doing something better or we could be adding more value that's in reference to others without identifying and acknowledging that we need some benefit for ourselves too. So these are some of the things that I had to sort of experience going through my life. And so I had tremendous skills once upon a time in the way that I spent my spare time. What other ways did I have that I felt like I was wasting it? I would love to sit and read books too. And sometimes, no, actually, oftentimes I would feel really guilty about that, especially in that season of life when I enjoyed audiobooks. No, yeah, audiobooks and also just fiction books as well too. Love that. Again, stories, beautiful, right? But I felt guilty about it because maybe it was something to do with the fact that I knew I would be judged by those around me if I spend my spare time this way. That made me do those things with a sense of guilt and feeling that I didn't have that balance. You know how it's really important to have, as we're doing the, things that we enjoy doing in our spare time, we sometimes elongate that spare time. We make it more and we become irresponsible because we start doing things when we should be doing something else. That was something else I think that really fed that guilty feeling for me was because I didn't have that balance. And maybe it's because, again, I felt guilty for doing these things. And as I felt guilty for doing these things, I wanted to get as much of it as I could instead of maintaining balance and saying, okay, I'm going to do this for an hour and a half before I get back to this. I would just kind of overdo it on this one here. And then I'd really feel guilty, right? And that's spare time would eclipse the other responsibilities I had. And perhaps that's where that sense of guilt would come from as well. But I meant so in terms of thinking, I think a lot about scenarios and settings and experiences that I may have experienced or may never have experienced, but try to process how I'd think my way through them. So I give myself a lot to thinking about my future, my present, and my past. And my thinking is at a fairly high level, very analytical, very measured, very how can I say that? Like when I think, try to be as thorough as I can. I try to be as thorough in my process of thinking because I want to cover as many bases as possible. I want to be able to move forward in such a way whereby I'm like, okay, I am all in. I'm very being super aware of my dynamics, my circumstances, what's going on in my life. Um, I don't like being blindsided. I don't like the feeling of not having things worked out before I get there. And so that's why I give myself a lot to thinking and trying to understand before I ever get to a certain setting. So a lot of my time is devoted to thinking, and I think that's why I'm really successful at having amazing conversations because I think a lot. I think deeply. I read tons and get more ideas and then I consider and I'm a very critical thinker, and that critical thinking has enabled me to live in this zone of fantastic conversations in my mind first that I get to have with people as a result. And why that's thrilling for me is because I'm thriving on it in my mind. And so it's a fantastic place. It's a very active place in my mind. I rarely get tired of it. I quite enjoy it, but I give myself quite intentionally to it because this is my way of going forward and saying, here's where I find tremendous value. Now, I do a lot of thinking on so many areas of my life. For example, I was mentioning how once upon a time I would feel really guilty about watching movies because I was like, I'm wasting time instead of saying, this is an appropriate way to spend my spare time and I'm going to indulge myself in this. I'm going to enjoy this, right? So, along those lines, today, like for example, when I watch a movie where once upon a time I was feeling super guilty, today I don't feel guilty anymore. I'm like, okay, I'm going to watch this, I'm going to enjoy it, but my mind is still going to be on. I'm not going to check out here. I'm going to be thinking about what I'm watching and experiencing. I gave myself that and wondered what I would do if I were in this scenario, and this gives me tremendous joy. I think about my own real life, the people that I have in my life that I really care for, and the kind of things that they're going through, and how I'd want to speak into their life and encourage them along their way. I think about how I would respond if I'm watching other people that I'm not related to, and some things that I see there. I think about even as I'm driving, for example, the decisions people are making on the road and how they express them. There's so many ways I think, but I do a lot of thinking because for me, it serves me first and foremost to know how I'm going to engage with my world in a way that, hi, Elhaj, in a way that enables me to feel that sense of awareness, intuitiveness, experiences. I'm like, okay, this is a really good place that I'm in. This is a really happy setting for me to engage my world. That's really important for me. So thinking is huge. Thinking is huge for me in my spare time because as I think, whether I'm reading a book, whether I'm watching a movie, whether I'm going for a walk, whether I'm engaging on my um, live streams, whether I am recording content, whether I'm interacting with my kids. These are a lot of things I fill my spare time with. But as I do so, my thinking cap is always on, trying to think carefully about how I'm going into various experiences. That's super important for me. So, one of the primary things I do in the midst of many activities that I spend on my spare time is I do a lot of thinking about what it is that I'm applying myself to. And that's important for me. Secondly, love giving of myself in whichever way I can that benefits others. Really appreciate that. I really enjoy the the riches that I have to be able to share with many around me. That for me is something super important, and I value that tremendously. Now, as I give, I'm looking for different ways of giving. Once upon a time, I thought the only appropriate way for giving and showing generosity is through money. I don't think that anymore, but that's how I always would think once upon a time. And so I rarely ever thought of myself as a generous person. Today, however, I definitely think of myself as one who is rich in generosity because I give so much and I love giving. I give out of the overflow of what I'm experiencing, if that makes sense. I have so much of whatever I'm giving shade in my experience as I give is just that ability to enrich the lives of those around me. And that for me brings me a tremendous sense of value and like I'm in the right place at the right time, right? It's so beautiful when I get to do that. So that's an important part for me too. Um, I enjoy giving of my time. That's probably the biggest way that I give of my time right now. So in my spare time, I love being able to give to those around me, whether I'm sitting down, usually it's sitting down and giving, advice as I listen to their context or their life story or the struggles that they're working their way through. I love giving of my time by way of sharing my experiences, sharing my insights, sharing my suggestions and encouragements. That is a rich time for me. Love being able to do that. I love giving of my time. Oh yeah, by way of also honing in these skills that I have to be able to share with others. So I do a lot of reading, like I say. Here are some books that they're underneath my camera stand right here. The Go Givers one I have right now. Crushing It by Gary Vaynerchuk. There's just a few things here that are appealing to me in a very deep way that I'm like, I want to understand the insights of others so that I can benefit even more, even as I reap the benefits of that too. So there you have it, my friends. Those are some of the areas in which I find myself investing when I have spare time. Again, two key areas are giving of my time with generosity and doing a lot of thinking, some deep thinking. What we have is a gift. Rarely do we sort of pause to savor those moments that we get, to be able to say, hey, with these moments that I have right now, how can I apply it really well? How can I go through life guilt free, doing what I enjoy, but also knowing that it was really worthwhile the way I invested myself? That's why I do this podcast, is because this for me is time well spent. You could say this is what I do in my spare time. I love sharing on my podcast and sharing my insights. But do you know, even as I spend this time, I've accounted for this time very carefully, saying this is meaningful. I want this to count for something worthwhile. I want this, as it goes out there, to be able to have tremendous impact on those ears that it reaches. How can I bring the best that I have with generosity and saying, here, what does time well invested, time well indulged in your spare moments look like? How can you enjoy those moments guilt-free? How can you make space and time in your schedule to have those spare moments? And how are you going to think about it beforehand so that you can enjoy it as well as you can? Those are worthwhile questions, I believe, reflecting on it. Here on the Bin Checkin podcast, I am so much a fan of thinking through how we can become aware of ourselves, how we can show kindness to ourselves in the midst of our change over time, and how we can experience more happiness. As a life recalibrator, that's one of the things I really find tremendous joy in, is being able to help others recalibrate their past experiences, which means be stifling or binding, so they can experience and relate something promising in their future. Check out my website, vinniemasses.com. Hope to see you guys tomorrow. Have a great Tuesday. Bye for now.